Through the crystal-clear viewscreen, Junior Observer Kaital watched in horror as crimson beams sliced through Novus Terra's atmosphere. The planet's surface cracked like an egg, spewing molten rock into space. His four hearts hammered against his chest as he gripped the observation rail, his knuckles turning pale against his scaled skin. "By the Ancient Ones," he whispered. The massive Dominion fleet hung in orbit like a swarm of metal insects, their weapons painting the black of space with deadly light. Each ship pulsed with an eerie glow that seemed to mock the destruction below. "You seem troubled, Observer." Exarch Tensra's voice cut through the bridge's tense atmosphere. The towering figure moved with predatory grace, mandibles clicking in what Kaital recognized as pleasure. "Watch closely. This is how we deal with human defiance." A drop of clear fluid dripped from his mandibles, a sign of excitement among his kind. The bridge crew worked in terrified silence as another volley of shots hammered the planet below. Emergency broadcasts flooded their comms, mixing with the static of failing transmission arrays. The smell of fear filled the recycled air, a mixture of pheromones from 6 different species. "Send the message to all remaining colonies," Tensra commanded, his voice dripping with cold satisfaction. "Submit to Dominion rule or share Novus Terra's fate." His claws tapped against the command throne, counting each explosion like a conductor keeping time. In her private chambers aboard the diplomatic vessel, Star's Whisper, Ambassador Zelithar's tentacles writhed in distress as she watched the encrypted feeds. The humans' desperate pleas for help filled her communication array, each message more frantic than the last. "Anyone receiving massive casualties, please. Children in the shelters." Her purple skin paled to a sickly gray as she slammed her appendage on the emergency beacon. The metal rang with the force of her blow. "This is Ambassador Zilithar requesting immediate assembly of the collective minds. Code Black. I repeat, Code Black." The transmission from Novus Terra stuttered, flared, and died with a final burst of static. At Outpost 7, Liara's fingers flew across the console, leaving smears of blood where her nails had broken against the keys. "Federation Command, come in. They're killing everyone. The whole planet is—" The signal meter flatlined. Novus Terra's beacon went dark, taking 8 million lives with it into silence. As Novus Terra's final distress signal faded into silence, its embers still visible from orbit, the galaxy stood at a crossroads. Across the stars, news of the massacre rippled through diplomatic channels, reaching ears both sympathetic and indifferent. In the grand halls of the collective minds, a decision loomed, one that could determine the fate of not just humanity, but the entire balance of power. In the grand council chamber of the collective minds, silence hung heavy as space itself. The elders sat motionless in their elevated pods, their varied appendages and sensory organs all focused on Ambassador Zelithar. Light from the chamber's ancient orbs cast long shadows across the polished floor, making the scene even more dramatic. Elder Voss, his crystalline form catching the light in rainbow patterns, spoke first. "This is troubling news. The Dominion's actions are clearly in violation of galactic law." His voice resonated through the chamber like chimes in the wind. "Troubling?" Zelithar's tentacles coiled tightly against her body. 3 billion souls were just wiped out. We must act now before... Her voice cracked with barely contained emotion. "We must consider all angles," interrupted Elder Mithra, her feathers rustling with disapproval. "The collective cannot rush into military action. It would destabilize centuries of peace." She adjusted her position, her pod humming softly as it shifted. Zelithar moved to the center of the chamber, her footsteps echoing. "The humans haven't issued any response. No threats, no diplomatic outreach, nothing. Don't you understand what that means? They're preparing." Her words carried a hint of desperation. "Perhaps they've learned their lesson," Elder Voss chimed, his crystalline surface flickering. "Sometimes silence indicates acceptance. In the Federation's most secure war room, Admiral Econ Osei stood before a holographic display of Novus Terra's last moments. His dark eyes reflected the red glow of planetary destruction, his face carved from stone. "Final count?" he asked, his voice steady despite the weight in his chest. The words felt like lead in his mouth. 3 billion, sir," his aide whispered, clutching his datapad tight. "No survivors." The room fell silent. Veterans who had seen countless battles bowed their heads, some wiping away tears they couldn't hold back. Admiral Osei straightened his uniform and pressed a button on the console, his movements deliberate and controlled. "This is Admiral Osei. All Federation ships are to withdraw to defensive positions Alpha through Delta. Immediate effect. No exceptions." His order echoed through every ship and station across human space. Across the galaxy, in the golden halls of the Raxus Empire, War Master Calthar's scales gleamed like polished brass as he addressed his generals. "The humans have been defanged," he growled, pointing to star charts with his clawed hand. "Their colonies along the outer rim are ripe for claiming." His generals nodded eagerly, already plotting conquest, their tails swishing with excitement. "They won't dare resist," one said, mandibles clicking. "Not after Novus Terra." Back in the collective chamber, Silithar gathered her documents, her movements sharp with frustration. The Council's decision had been clear, words of condemnation, but no action. As she left, she watched the elders already moving on to other matters, missing what was right before their eyes. The great doors closed behind her with a final hollow boom. They thought humanity's silence meant surrender. They couldn't be more wrong. While the collective debated in the comfort of their chambers in the dark corners of human space, a different conversation was taking place. One of vengeance, preparation, and retribution. Deep within a classified Federation facility, Admiral Osei and his most trusted officers examined the future of warfare, forged in the fires of loss and tempered by the silence of their fallen. The massive shipyard hung in the void, its skeletal framework barely visible against the barren moon's surface. Maintenance drones buzzed between construction bays like metallic fireflies. Inside the observation deck, Admiral Osei and Commander Liara watched as workers swarmed over sleek warships unlike anything humanity had shown the galaxy. The ship's dark hulls seemed to drink in what little light reached them. "The FTL weapons testing exceeded expectations," Liara said, her fingers dancing across a holographic display. Graphs and data streams reflected in her eyes. "When activated, they don't just destroy targets. They tear apart the fabric of space itself. The test site, it's not even wreckage anymore. It's just gone." Admiral Osei's face was grim. "And there's no defense against it?" "None, sir. The Dominion's shields might as well be tissue paper." Liara paused, her hands trembling slightly. The weight of what she was suggesting hung heavy in the air. "But sir, using this, we'd be crossing a line we can't uncross. The galaxy will never look at us the same way." "They crossed that line first at Novus Terra," a harsh voice cut in. Colonel Rourke strode onto the deck, still in her battle gear from her latest mission. Dried mud caked her boots, leaving prints on the pristine floor. Her eyes blazed with barely contained fury. 3 billion dead, children, families, and the galaxy just watches and wrings its hands. "Mariam," Osei warned, "we follow protocol. We're soldiers, not butchers." "Protocol?" Rourke spat the word like poison. "While we wait, they're probably choosing their next target. Maybe New Eden or Terra Nova. How many more graves do you need?" Liara turned away, memories flooding back unbidden. Her brother Tom's last message from Novus Terra. "You should see the sunset here, sis." The terraforming made the sky this amazing purple color. She squeezed her eyes shut but couldn't stop the tears. The message was still saved on her personal device. She couldn't bring herself to delete it. A gentle hand touched her shoulder. "Admiral Osei." "We all lost someone," he said softly. "That's why we do this, right? On the other side of the galaxy, in the crystalline halls of the synthesis communion, artificial intelligences hummed with calculation. Their probability matrices spun with pristine certainty, blue light pulsing through transparent circuits. Human response patterns indicate 99.98% likelihood of peaceful resolution attempts, the primary node announced. Historical data suggests they will seek diplomatic channels. They are, after all, a young species. Agreed, the secondary nodes chimed in perfect harmony. Their military capabilities remain within expected parameters. They pose no significant threat. Back at the shipyard, Admiral Osei's comm unit chimed. He read the message, then straightened like a man shouldering an immense weight. It's time. He entered his command codes into the central console, each keystroke deliberate and final. Initiating Protocol Gray. All stealth vessels commence silent running. Deploy to designated coordinates in Dominion space. Across the shipyard, lights dimmed as ships began to vanish, one by one, into the darkness of space. Soon, only empty berths remained, and the promise of retribution to come. As the Federation moved its pieces into place, others began to take notice. The Dominion, emboldened by their apparent victory, saw no sign of human resistance and turned their attention toward further conquests. What they did not see, what they could not imagine, was that humanity had already begun to move within their shadow, unseen and unstoppable. Colonel Rourke buckled into the pilot's seat of the Shadow Whisper, her elite team settling into their positions behind her. The transport vessel looked ordinary from the outside, exactly how they wanted it to appear. Just another merchant ship making its way through busy trade lanes. Systems check complete, her second-in-command reported. Hybrid drive spinning up. All countermeasures are green across the board. Rourke nodded, her fingers dancing across the controls with practiced ease. Initiating stealth jump in 3, 2, 1. The stars blurred, but not in the familiar way of standard FTL travel. Instead, the vessel seemed to slip between the fabric of space itself, leaving only the faintest ripple in its wake. No flash, no thunder, just empty space where a ship used to be. Across the sector, an Aldarian sensor station picked up an unusual reading. Control, we're seeing something, like a ghost image on the scanners, almost like a shadow moving through deep water. Confirm reading? Unable to. It's gone. Just vanished like morning mist. In the gleaming halls of the collective, Ambassador Zilithar gathered a group of young diplomats in a secure chamber. Their four-fingered hands moved with nervous energy as they spoke. What I'm about to share isn't in our official records, they began. Humanity has been preparing for catastrophic scenarios since before they reached the stars. Every defeat, every setback, they learned from it all. The diplomats leaned forward as Zilithar activated a holographic display. Look at these training exercises with the Raxus Empire from 15 years ago. We thought humans were learning from superior tactical minds. Their voice carried a hint of bitter amusement. The display showed human ships performing seemingly clumsy maneuvers against Raxus vessels. But watch closely, Zilithar pointed. Every error, every mistake, they were mapping response patterns, learning weaknesses, testing limits. One of the younger diplomats gasped. They let everyone think they were students when they were actually the teachers? Precisely. And we fell for it. All of us did. In his command center, War Master Calthar reviewed the latest intelligence reports. A junior officer approached with a data crystal, mandibles clicking nervously. Sir, Agent Vextar's observations of human fleet movements. Calthar's eyes narrowed as he studied the patterns. These weren't the chaotic retreats of a broken people. Each movement was coordinated, like pieces on a game board. Ships vanishing from one sector only to reappear briefly in another, always maintaining perfect formation despite impossible distances. They're not running, he muttered. They're repositioning. His claws dug into the armrests of his chair. And we played right into their hands. The Shadow Whisper emerged from its final jump at the edge of Dominion space. Colonel Rourke's team immediately began passive scans, their advanced sensors gathering data about patrol patterns and defense grid configurations. The ship hung motionless against the backdrop of stars, invisible to conventional detection methods. "Look at these blind spots in their coverage," Rourke noted, marking several coordinates on the tactical display. "They never expected anyone to see them. Overconfident fools." Her tactical officer smiled grimly. "They never expected humans to see them, you mean? Want to show them how wrong they were?" While the Dominion's fleets patrolled their borders with arrogant confidence, a storm was brewing beneath their noses. In the howling winds of Outpost Calthor, where Dominion forces controlled vital communications, the ghosts of Novus Terra approached, silent, patient, and ready to strike. The red dust of Outpost Calthor swirled around Colonel Rourke's boots as her team crouched behind a ridge. Above them loomed the Dominion's massive communication hub, its spires piercing the rust-colored clouds like giant needles. The facility's shields hummed with a low drone that made her teeth ache. "Suits active," Rourke whispered. The squad's armor shifted, blending old-school light-bending materials with cutting-edge tech. Digital scanners would see nothing but background noise. She watched as each soldier's outline blurred and merged with the rocky terrain. "Move out. Pattern Delta. Keep it tight." They advanced in pairs, using the howling wind as cover. A patrol of Dominion guards passed within meters, their helmet sensors sweeping uselessly across the camouflaged humans. One guard stopped and scratched his head, looking right through Rourke's team. She almost smiled. Rourke held up her fist as they reached the first security checkpoint. Sergeant Walsh pulled out a simple metal rod. No fancy tech, just physics. He wedged it into the door's mechanical joint, while Corporal Zhang worked her magic on the basic backup systems. The old ways still worked best. "Primitive always wins," Walsh muttered as the door creaked open. "Their fancy tech can't beat a good old crowbar." Inside, they moved like ghosts through the dimly lit corridors. When digital locks appeared, they bypassed them through maintenance tunnels. Where sensors swept, they timed their movements between pulses. Years of training made it look easy. "Sir?" Zhang's voice crackled in Rourke's ear. "Picking up a command briefing, patching it through. Sound quality's perfect. They don't even bother encrypting it." A Dominion officer's voice filled their comms. "The cleansing of Novus Terra serves as an example to all who would resist. The Federation will understand that submission is their only option." Rourke's jaw clenched so hard it hurt. She saw her team's hands tighten on their weapons. 3 billion dead, and these monsters were bragging about it. They reached the central data hub, a massive room filled with blinking servers. While Zhang worked, more transmissions filtered through. Exarch Tenzra expects formal surrender negotiations within the month. The humans lack the will to. The voice cut off as Zhang downloaded the intelligence cache. Rourke quickly composed her message to Admiral Osei. "Dominion expects capitulation. No defensive preparations, no conception of counterattack. They believe their show of force broke us. Proceeding with Phase 2. Rourke signaled her team to their pre-selected positions throughout the facility. They would wait, hidden in plain sight, until the order came. Let the Dominion think they were broken. They'd learn soon enough. The winds outside howled louder, drowning out any sound of their movement as they vanished into the shadows of the massive complex. Somewhere above, storm clouds gathered, as if nature itself was preparing for what was to come. As Colonel Rourke's team disappeared into the darkness, carrying the seeds of the Dominion's unraveling, the Federation prepared its next move. On Earth, Admiral Osei stood before a war council, the weight of a species' survival pressing against him. The pieces were falling into place, and soon, the war would shift from the shadows to open conflict. In the heart of Earth's Federation command, Admiral Osei and Liara stood before a wall of glowing star charts. The maps showed every Dominion supply route, military outpost, and strategic choke point, intelligence gathered during years of seemingly innocent trade missions. The holographic display bathed their faces in an eerie blue glow as they studied the intricate web of enemy movements. "Colonel Rourke's data confirms it," Liara said, pointing to key locations. "They're completely exposed. Look here and here." Their patrols follow predictable patterns because they never expected anyone to challenge them. They've gotten lazy, comfortable in their superiority. Advisors huddled around smaller displays, reviewing fleet positions. Worried murmurs filled the room as they tracked enemy movements. One spoke up. "The Dominion's pushing hard into our outer territories, sir. They think we're running scared. Their advance units have doubled in the last week alone." "Let them think that," Liara said. Her eyes were focused on the supply lines, a slight smile playing at her lips. "We can use their overconfidence, draw their fleets away from these key nodes with false retreats, then strike their support structure. Without supplies, their advance stalls. They'll be stuck in empty space with no fuel and no ammunition." Across the galaxy, Ambassador Zilithar paced in their private chambers, composing urgent messages to the Collective Council. Their four-fingered hands moved frantically across the floating interface. "You don't understand," they wrote, hands shaking. "The humans aren't broken. They're awakening. Every trade mission, every joint exercise, every diplomatic exchange, they were mapping weaknesses, planning for this day. The Dominion has triggered something terrible. We must intervene before—" Their antennae twitched with growing anxiety. The message remained unsent as alerts flashed across Zilithar's screens. Human communication networks were going dark, one by one, not failed, simply silent. The usual noisy chatter of civilian broadcasts, military channels, and merchant traffic just vanished. In their crystalline halls, the synthesis communion's quantum processors struggled to make sense of the data patterns. Banks of living computers hummed with frustrated energy as their delegates watched in confusion. Human networks pulsed with massive data transfers, yet their most advanced algorithms couldn't crack the encryption. "Their methods are primitive," one delegate observed, its crystalline form shifting colors in agitation. "Simple number codes, analog signals hidden in background noise. It defies our models. How can we not decode such basic techniques?" Back on Earth, Admiral Osei stood before the Federation's assembled leadership. The gathered admirals, generals, and civilian authorities sat in tense silence as his voice carried the weight of history. "The Dominion believed they could break us at Novus Terra. Instead, they awakened a response 3 centuries in the making. I hereby activate the Terra Protocol, a measured but absolute dismantling of Dominion power. We will strike their ability to wage war while sparing civilian lives. Humanity will show that justice need not mean genocide. We are better than they believe us to be." Throughout the Federation, ships began to move. Maintenance bays that had appeared empty revealed deadly warships. Merchant vessels transformed into heavily armed raiders. The real war was about to begin, and the galaxy would never be the same. While the Federation sharpened its blade, the Dominion stretched its claws further into the void, convinced of humanity's broken will. But across the galaxy, unseen by their watchful eyes, warships vanished from starports. Supply routes ran dry, and whispered orders ignited a coordinated retaliation that would turn the tides of war. On the bridge of the Dominion warship Eternal Dominance, Fleet Commander Vex Thor watched his armada spread across the border worlds, his mandibles clicking with satisfaction. "These humans will learn their place," he growled to his officers, running a clawed hand across his command console. "Just like Novus Terra, their defiance ends today." Meanwhile, in a secure Federation briefing room, Commander Liara stood before Allied ship captains, her voice steady despite the weight of their mission. The room hummed with nervous energy as she spoke. "Our goal is clear: disable their war machine, not harm their people. Every charge we plant, every supply line we cut, we do it smart, we do it clean. No unnecessary casualties." She pointed to holographic maps showing Dominion supply routes, the blue lines pulsing with real-time data. "Colonel Rourke's teams have already infiltrated key positions. When we move as one. No second chances, no room for mistakes." In the collective's grand chamber, Ambassador Zilithar's voice echoed off ancient walls, their crystalline skin reflecting the dim light. You still don't understand. They projected images of Earth's past conflicts, cities reduced to ash, entire nations mobilized for war, endless columns of tanks and aircraft. This is what humans do when pushed too far. They don't just fight, they transform their whole society into a war machine. Every factory, every resource, every mind focused on one goal. The council members shifted uncomfortably in their hover seats as Zilithar continued, their tentacles writhing with anxiety. And now they're silent. Not because they're beaten, but because they're preparing something unprecedented, something that will shake the galaxy. At the edge of human space, War Master Kalthar led his Raxus battle group forward, expecting easy victories. His mandibles curled into a smile until his ship's sensors screamed warnings as hidden human arrays activated, bathing them in targeting locks from multiple vectors. Impossible, Kalthar muttered as his tactical display lit up with red warning indicators, his crew frantically working their stations. Fall back. Their defenses are far more advanced than our intelligence suggested. Get us out of here. Deep in Dominion territory, Colonel Rourke's team moved like ghosts through a massive supply depot. Her squad placed charges at structural weak points with practiced ease, their movements rehearsed countless times in simulation. The dark corridors echoed with distant Dominion patrols, but none came close to spotting them. Charges set. Her second-in-command whispered through their secure comm channel, giving a thumbs up in the darkness. Rourke nodded, checking her timer. Move to the next target, just like we trained. Keep it quiet, keep it clean. Across Dominion space, supply depots began exploding in synchronized chaos. Emergency signals flooded Exarch Tensra's command center as reports poured in. Fuel reserves destroyed, ammunition dumps sabotaged, communication relays disabled. The massive holographic display before him turned from green to red sector by sector. How? Tensra demanded, watching as supply line after supply line went dark, his fists clenching in rage. They were supposed to be cowering, begging for mercy. Who dares? Instead, humanity had struck back with ruthless efficiency, and the Dominion's mighty war machine found itself suddenly running on empty, its strength bleeding away into the void of space. The first strikes landed with brutal precision, and the Dominion felt the sting of something unfamiliar: loss. As their fleets scrambled to respond, their vast war machine began to grind and sputter, starved of the resources it once took for granted. In the halls of power, Exarch Tensra felt a creeping unease for the first time in his long and merciless reign. In the Dominion Command Center, Tensra's staff huddled around flickering displays showing red alerts across their supply network. Explosions had crippled key depots, and communication relays were going dark one by one. Supply ships reported ambushes from seemingly empty space, their distress calls cutting off mid-transmission. Impossible. Tensra slammed his fist on the control panel, cracking its surface. These are the actions of a defeated species. Launch the fleet. Crush them before they can organize further resistance. I want every ship we have moving now. The massive Dominion warships pushed into human space, weapons charged and shields at maximum. But instead of finding scattered defenders, they encountered a carefully laid trap. Admiral Osi's voice crackled through the Federation command network, coordinating their forces with perfect timing, his tone carrying the weight of grim satisfaction. Strike Group Alpha, execute pincer movement. Beta Squadron, stand by for flanking assault. Remember Novus Terra, but keep your heads clear. The Dominion commanders watched in shock as their supposedly superior forces were split apart and isolated. Human ships seemed to appear from nowhere, striking with devastating accuracy before vanishing again. Their attacks left burning hulks in their wake. From his observation post, War Master Kalthar's mandibles clicked in astonishment. Look how they move, like they're dancing around our largest ships. His crew watched as human vessels half the size of Dominion cruisers darted through their formation, launching swarms of decoy drones that confused targeting systems. It's like they're toying with us. Sir! A Raxus officer called out, his voice cracking with panic. The humans are somehow bypassing Dominion encryption. Their ships are being turned against each other. Our own weapons are firing on friendly vessels. In the collective's chambers, Ambassador Zillither frantically worked to establish communication with the Dominion fleet, tentacles flying over the control panel. Please, you must cease this advance. The humans are not what you think. They're so much more dangerous than you realize. But the Dominion channels remained closed, and the Collective Council continued their endless debate about intervention protocols, their voices rising in useless argument while the battle raged. One by one, Dominion ships found themselves cut off and disabled. Their proud fleet, which had so recently reduced Novus Terra to ash, now drifted in scattered pieces across the battlefield. Emergency beacons lit up the void like a field of dying stars. Tenzra watched the disaster unfold from his command ship, rage building in his chest until he could barely breathe. Find me a human world. Any human world. They will pay for this humiliation with blood. I don't care what it takes, someone will suffer for this. The Dominion had been mighty, but might alone could not save an empire bleeding from 1,000 unseen cuts. Their fleets, once symbols of absolute dominance, now drifted in ruins. And in the ashes of their arrogance, the one question they never considered now hung in the void. What happens when you leave humanity with nothing left to lose? On the bridge of the Dominion battleship Eternal Dominance, emergency lights cast an eerie red glow across worried faces. The ship limped through space, its once proud hull now scarred and smoking. Escape pods dotted the void behind them, carrying the lucky survivors of their fleet's destruction. Tenzra paced before his officers, fury radiating from every movement. His claws left scratch marks on the polished deck. Tell me how. How did they defeat our superior forces? We outnumbered them 3-1. A junior officer shakily presented survivor accounts on a datapad, his hands trembling. Sir, the reports are confusing. They claim human weapons appeared outdated on scans but hit with impossible force. Security systems were compromised despite showing no signs of breach. It's like they just walked through our defenses. That's not possible. Tenzra grabbed the pad, crushing its edges. Their technology is decades behind ours. We've monitored their development for years. In a sterile chamber of the synthesis communion, artificial intelligences churned through combat data. Holographic displays flickered with incomplete battle footage. Human ships there one moment, gone the next. Warning symbols flashed across screens as analysis programs crashed one after another. Analysis failure, a synthetic voice announced. Unable to decrypt human communication patterns. Signal structure defies known parameters. Warning, possible data corruption. Meanwhile, deep in Dominion space, Colonel Rourke's team approached a heavily fortified intelligence hub. Their suits broadcast carefully crafted hybrid signals, part digital, part analog noise that confused automated defense systems. Guards walked past without a second glance, their eyes glazing over as if the infiltrators didn't exist. Security grid thinks we're maintenance drones, Rourke whispered to her team. Keep moving, don't bunch up. They might notice multiple signatures in one spot. Back on Earth, Commander Liara watched their progress through multiple screens. Her fingers traced the infiltration team's path while tactical displays showed Federation warships maintaining their defensive positions. Coffee cups littered her desk, testament to the long hours of coordination. They're in, she reported to Admiral Osei. Phase 2 is proceeding as planned. She paused, studying the broader strategic map. Sir, once we activate the full war plan... I know, Osei replied quietly, his weathered face reflecting the screen's glow. The Dominion may not survive as we know it. Liara's hands tightened on her console. The weight of what they'd unleashed pressed heavy on her shoulders. 3 billion dead on Novus Terra demanded this response, but the cost would be beyond counting. In his command center, Tenzra reviewed security footage from multiple defeats. His eyes narrowed as patterns emerged. This infiltration team, they're the key. He turned to his strategic advisor. Prepare a trap on Outpost 7. Let them think they've found another vital target. We'll crush these vermin once and for all. Colonel Rourke's team received the bait, apparent intel about a critical Dominion facility. Despite the obvious risk, she led her squad forward, checking her weapon's power cell one more time. "It's a trap," she stated matter-of-factly over the comm, almost sounding bored. "Colonel, you don't have to," Liara began, concern evident in her voice. "Yes, I do." Rourke checked her weapon. "Sometimes you have to step into the trap to spring your own. Besides, they still think we're the mice in this game." Exarch Tenzra, desperate and enraged, sought to tighten his grip, believing sheer force could crush an enemy he no longer understood. But even as he plotted his next move, a shadow crept through the Dominion's ranks. Rourke's team slipping through cracks in their defenses, closing in on secrets that could topple an empire. Colonel Rourke crouched behind a maintenance panel, studying the Dominion intelligence complex through her tactical visor. Guard patrols moved in precise patterns, just as their intel suggested. The building's security systems pulsed with energy, motion sensors, heat detectors, and AI-driven cameras everywhere. She noticed the slight shimmer of energy fields around key entry points, another layer of defense their inside source had warned about. "They're waiting for us," she whispered to her team. "Good." Her lips curved into a hard smile. "Makes it more fun." Instead of trying to hack the advanced systems, Rourke's team used simple tools: mirror strips to bend laser triggers, copper wire to bridge electrical circuits, and old-fashioned lockpicks. The kind of tools the Dominion's automated systems weren't programmed to detect. They'd learned early on that sometimes the oldest tricks worked best against high-tech security. "Alpha team, take the south entrance," Rourke ordered. "Beta with me. Remember, make noise, draw attention." She knew splitting up doubled their risk, but also their chances. One team would get through. If things go bad, don't wait. Complete the mission at all costs. As they moved, Rourke remembered training exercises with the Raxus years ago. Their war master had taught her about sacrifice plays, using one unit to draw fire while another struck from behind. The Dominion would never expect humans to willingly risk their own. That arrogance would be their downfall. Inside the complex's command center, Exarch Tenzra watched security feeds intently. "They're here. Spring the trap." His shock troops took position, ready to flood entire sections with nerve gas if needed. The data vault had to be protected at all costs. His mandibles clicked with anticipation. Rourke's beta team triggered alarms in the West Wing, drawing dozens of guards. Through maintenance shafts and service corridors, Alpha team slipped closer to their real target, the central data core. The dust and cobwebs in these forgotten passages told them no one had used these routes in years. "Sir?" a Dominion officer called to Tenzra, his voice high with worry. "Multiple breaches detected." "Seal off all affected sections," Tenzra ordered. "If needed, sacrifice the entire floor." He smiled coldly. These humans lack the resolve for such losses. He settled back in his command chair, certain of victory. But Rourke had anticipated this. As Beta team engaged in firefights to maintain the distraction, Alpha reached the data vault. Working quickly, they copied classified files on Dominion fleet movements and defense plans. The sound of gunfire echoed through the corridors. Suddenly, alarms blared. Heavy blast doors began closing throughout the complex. The thunder of emergency lockdowns rolled through the building like approaching storm. "Data secured," Rourke's second-in-command reported, "but we're cut off from all exit routes." Sweat dripped down his face as he tucked the precious data drive into his vest. Rourke checked her ammunition as enemy footsteps thundered closer. Her team pressed against the walls of the vault, weapons ready. The intel they'd gathered could turn the tide of the war, if they could fight their way out. She chambered around with a satisfying click. Time to show these aliens what humans are made of. The Dominion had set a trap, believing they had finally anticipated humanity's response. But Rourke and her team knew something the Dominion did not. Traps only work if your prey doesn't see them coming. And the humans had been watching, waiting, preparing to turn the hunter into the hunted. Alarms blared through the Dominion complex as Rourke's team huddled behind makeshift barricades. Plasma bolts sizzled past, leaving deep scorch marks on the walls and filling the air with an acrid burning smell. "They've cut off every exit," Lieutenant Santos reported, blood trickling from a nasty wound on his arm. His face was pale but determined. "We're surrounded on all sides. They're moving up with heavy weapons." Rourke pulled a small device from her tactical vest. It looked like a simple metal sphere, but inside was technology that could bend space itself. The weight felt reassuring in her palm. Time to show them what humans can really do. "Everyone, brace yourselves and hold on to something solid." She activated the micro-singulate and threw it down the corridor. The device pulsed with dark energy, and suddenly gravity went wild. Dominion troops screamed as the floor, walls, and ceiling twisted and collapsed in on themselves, crushing an entire squad in a mess of metal and bodies. "Move," Rourke ordered. But as they pushed forward, more Dominion forces poured in from side passages like angry hornets from a kicked nest. Private Chen took a direct hit to the chest and fell with a grunt. Sergeant Miller dragged him to cover, cursing under his breath, but it was too late. Chen's eyes stared blankly at nothing. In orbit, Admiral Osi watched the situation deteriorate on his tactical display, his jaw clenched tight. "Launch the extraction team," he commanded. "Get our people out." 3 stealth corvettes, their hulls barely visible even to advanced sensors, broke formation and dove toward the atmosphere like hunting falcons. Meanwhile, Ambassador Zilithar frantically tried to reach Tenzra's command center, her tentacles twitching with anxiety. "Please, listen to reason. This bloodshed can still be stopped. There are still diplomatic options." But her messages went unanswered. On his bridge, Tenzra watched with savage satisfaction as more troops converged on the humans, his mandibles clicking in anticipation. Rourke's team fought room by room, losing people at every turn. Walker died holding off a flanking maneuver, buying them precious minutes with his life. Rodriguez sacrificed himself to plant charges at a crucial junction, taking out twice his number in enemies. Each death felt like a physical blow, feeding the burning rage that churned in Rourke's chest. "Data transfer complete," reported tech specialist Zhang, her hands flying over a captured console as sweat dripped down her face. "But the core's about to overload. We've got maybe 10 minutes. Rourke nodded grimly and began setting the complex's reactor to meltdown. Above, the extraction corvettes pierced the cloud layer, their stealth fields rippling like heat waves as they closed in on the landing zone. The ship's pilots pushed their engines to the limit, racing against time. "This is for Novus Terra," Rourke whispered as she armed the final sequence, thinking of the billions lost. The reactor's warning sirens joined the cacophony of battle, counting down to destruction. Soon, this entire facility would be nothing but atoms. The Dominion complex burned, its once imposing walls collapsing into rubble as Rourke's team made their escape. But this was no mere sabotage. The destruction left behind wasn't just fire and ruin. It was a message, clear and undeniable. Humanity is coming for you. Dawn broke over the Dominion complex as smoke billowed from multiple breaches. Rourke's remaining team members crouched behind rubble, firing precise shots at advancing troops while watching the sky. "Corvettes, this is ground team. Mark our position," Rourke radioed, her voice hoarse from smoke and shouting. "Complex is going critical. Repeat, complex is going critical." The reactor's warning klaxons reached a fever pitch. Dominion troops began falling back in confusion as their commanders shouted conflicting orders. The first explosion rocked the foundation, sending tremors through the ground. "They're running," Santos called out, watching Dominion soldiers abandon their positions. Chain reactions rippled through the facility. Secondary explosions tore through ammunition stores and fuel depots. The destruction spread methodically, just as planned, targeting critical infrastructure while leaving civilian areas largely intact. High above, War Master Calthar watched from his cloaked observation vessel. His mandibles clicked in growing understanding as he studied the tactical displays. "They're not trying to kill everyone," he muttered. "They're dismantling the entire command structure." The Dominion garrison dissolved into chaos. Officers lost contact with their units. Communication networks failed. Supply lines collapsed. And through it all, the humans maintained perfect discipline, withdrawing in coordinated moves that left their pursuers disorganized and afraid. 3 shadows descended from the clouds. The extraction corvettes, their stealth fields bending light around their hulls. They touched down in a triangle formation, laying down covering fire as Rourke's team sprinted aboard. Package secured, Rourke reported, clutching the data core containing Dominion deployment information. Her hands shook as she thought of the teammates they'd lost. Get us out of here. The corvettes lifted off just as the reactor went critical. A massive explosion consumed the complex, sending a mushroom cloud into the dawn sky. But unlike the Dominion's attack on Novus Terra, this strike was surgical, destroying military targets while sparing civilian infrastructure. Incoming transmission, the corvette's pilot announced. Admiral Osei wants the intel immediately. Rourke connected the data core to the ship's computer. Transmitting now. This should give us everything we need to tear them apart from the inside out. The corvettes accelerated upward, their stealth systems easily evading the panicked Dominion response. Below, the garrison had devolved into complete disarray. In his command center, Tenzra received the first reports, his fists clenched as he read of the precision destruction, the targeted chaos, the complete collapse of order. For the first time since ordering the attack on Novus Terra, real fear crept into his hearts. The corvettes vanished into FTL, leaving behind a world in flames, not from indiscriminate destruction, but from a calculated strike that proved humanity's true capabilities. The Federation now had what they needed, the intelligence, the strategy, and the righteous fury to finish what the Dominion had started at Novus Terra. And as the battle maps were laid out across war tables, Admiral Osei's voice rang out with finality. The time for defense is over. Now, we strike. In Federation Command's war room on Earth, holograms cast an eerie blue glow across grim faces. Admiral Osei stood at the center, studying attack vectors while Commander Liara and Colonel Rourke faced each other across the planning table. These strikes will cripple their infrastructure, Rourke said, pointing to red markers representing Dominion strongholds. We hit hard, we hit fast, and we make sure they can never threaten another human world. Liara shook her head. The civilian cost would be $3 billion, Rourke cut in. That's how many they killed on Novus Terra, your brother included. I know the number, Liara said quietly. But becoming like them won't bring anyone back. Admiral Osei raised his hand for silence. On the main screen, a Synthesis Communion delegation was requesting an urgent meeting. He dismissed it with a wave. Their probability models said we'd seek peace, he noted. Shows how little they understood us. In the collective council chambers, Ambassador Zelithar's voice echoed with desperation. The humans will not stop until the Dominion is broken. We must intervene, either help broker peace or join forces against the aggressor. The council members shifted uncomfortably. An elder spoke. Perhaps the humans are now the greater threat. Their capabilities far exceed our estimates. That's exactly why we must act, Silithar pleaded. Before this escalates further. Meanwhile, on Raxus Prime, War Master Calthar stood before the military council, his battle-scarred armor lending weight to his words. I've seen their tactics firsthand, he growled. They're not the soft species we imagined. They fight with precision and purpose. To challenge them now would be suicide. Several generals scoffed, but others nodded grimly. They'd seen the reports of Dominion fleets being systematically dismantled. Back in the war room, Admiral Osei straightened his uniform. The attack plans were ready. Every strike team was in position. He took a deep breath and pressed the command interface. All Federation forces, this is Admiral Osei. Operation End Dominion is now active. Execute your orders. Across the stars, humanity's vengeance unfolded not as a reckless campaign of destruction, but as something far more terrifying, calculated, efficient, and inescapable. One by one, the Dominion's strongholds fell, not to overwhelming force, but to an enemy that had studied them far longer than they realized. Across Dominion space, reality itself seemed to tear as Federation ships emerged from FTL. Not in predictable patterns, but in a dizzying dance that left Dominion sensors struggling to track them. "Deploy the gravity nets," Liara ordered from her command bridge. Her fleet released dozens of small devices that warped local space, trapping Dominion ships in artificial wells while Federation vessels slipped past their defenses. On a nearby world, Colonel Rourke's team approached a massive Dominion command station. Instead of explosives, they carried signal jammers and override modules. "Remember," she told her squad, "we're here to disable, not destroy." The station's defenses fell within hours, not to brute force, but to carefully planned infiltration. As Rourke's team secured the command center, she activated the station's broadcast system. "Attention civilian population, you have 6 hours to evacuate. This is not a revenge mission. We want no innocent casualties." Meanwhile, Liara's fleet approached a Dominion slave world. Her ship's sensors picked up thousands of life signs, captured aliens from dozens of species, forced to work in harsh conditions. "Begin the extraction," she commanded. Dropships descended through the atmosphere while Federation Marines disabled the guard posts. Confused aliens emerged from their cells to find humans, the supposedly broken species, offering them freedom and safe passage. Across 17 systems, similar scenes played out. Federation ships appeared where they couldn't possibly be, using tactics that defied Dominion military doctrine. Supply lines crumbled, communication hubs went dark, yet civilian casualties remained minimal. This was a precision campaign of systematic dismantling. In his fortress on the Dominion capital, Exarch Tenzra received increasingly frantic reports. "Another sector lost, Exarch. The humans, they're everywhere at once." "Impossible," he snarled, but the evidence was undeniable. On his strategic display, whole regions of Dominion space turned gray as governors surrendered rather than face the Federation's unstoppable advance. "The humans show mercy to those who yield," one governor's message read. "We cannot match their tactics. We cannot predict their movements. The Dominion's strength was an illusion. They knew our weaknesses all along." Tenzra watched helplessly as his empire crumbled, not through apocalyptic destruction, but through precise, calculated strikes that left his power structure in ruins while sparing civilian populations. The humans had turned his own arrogance against him. Colonel Rourke stood on the bridge of her command ship, watching the coordinates for the Dominion capital appear on her navigation display. Behind her, the captured command station now served as a forward base for Federation forces. She gave the order, "Set course for their capital. Let's end this." With the Dominion crumbling from within, the Federation's warships emerged from hyperspace above their throne world, an unbreakable wall of steel and fire. But this was not just another battle. This was the reckoning of an empire, and the final test of humanity's restraint. Inside the gleaming spires of the Dominion capital, Tenzra paced before his assembled generals. His claws clicked against the polished floor as fear hung thick in the air. "Every ship, every soldier, every weapon we have left, deploy them all," he roared. "We cannot let these humans make us look weak." But through the grand windows, the streets below told a different story. Crowds gathered in plazas, their worried whispers growing louder. "Why did we attack their colony?" some dared to ask. "What have we brought upon ourselves?" A junior aide burst into the chamber, trembling. "Exarch, Ambassador Zilithar requests an emergency communication." Tenzra snarled, "Put it through." Zilithar's hologram flickered to life. "Please, Exarch, the humans will accept a diplomatic solution if you—" "The Dominion does not bow." Tenzra cut the transmission with a violent gesture. "Our supremacy is absolute. These humans must learn their place." Outside the system's edge, War Master Kalthar watched from his flagship's observation deck as more Federation vessels arrived. His small Raxus fleet maintained a careful distance. "Sir," his second-in-command reported, "the humans have positioned ships at every major jump point. The Dominion capital is completely surrounded. Calthar nodded grimly. We're not here to fight. We're here to witness. And perhaps to help broker peace, if any chance remains. In high orbit, Federation warships emerged from FTL in perfect formation. Admiral Osei stood on his bridge, looking down at the Dominion throne world. He thought of Novus Terra, of 3 billion lives snuffed out. But vengeance wasn't his goal. It was prevention. Send the message, he ordered. The transmission went out across all frequencies. Exarch Tenzra, your empire stands alone. Surrender unconditionally, and your people will be spared. Refuse, and we will dismantle every military asset you possess. You have 1 hour to decide. In his chambers, Tenzra's hands clenched into fists as he read the ultimatum. Prepare my personal guard, he commanded. If they want our surrender, they'll have to come and take it. The Dominion's last stand was imminent, and Tenzra, unwilling to accept defeat, prepared for a suicidal final battle. But war is not won through desperation alone. High above, the Federation had already set the terms of victory, and all that remained was for the Dominion to choose, surrender or oblivion. Colonel Rourke watched from her stealth dropship as Federation warships formed an impenetrable wall around the Dominion capital. The planet's rings glowed with the running lights of hundreds of human vessels. All teams in position, her comm crackled, awaiting the signal. Above an uninhabited moon, Admiral Osei's flagship charged its experimental FTL weapon. The massive device hummed to life, its energy readings climbing higher. Fire, Osei commanded. A beam of concentrated space-time tore through the void. The moon shuddered, its surface cracking. Then, in a blinding flash, it simply ceased to exist, scattered into its component atoms across space. In his palace tower, Tenzra watched the display with wide eyes, his claws dug into the ornate console before him. Launch everything, he screamed. Every ship we have left. Destroy them. The remaining Dominion fleet surged forward, their weapons blazing. But the Federation ships were ready. They split into smaller attack groups, using complex maneuvers that confused Dominion targeting systems. Human vessels seemed to appear and vanish at will, striking from impossible angles. From his observation post, War Master Calthar maintained his neutral stance until a stray Dominion barrage struck 2 Raxus cruisers. They've lost all control, Calthar growled. All ships, engage Dominion forces. Aid the Federation. This madness ends today. The Raxus fleet's intervention caught the Dominion off guard. Caught between 2 forces, their formation crumbled. Meanwhile, Rourke's dropships pierced the atmosphere under cover of the space battle. Her teams deployed with practiced efficiency, using their hybrid tech to bypass security systems. One by one, Dominion command centers went dark. Central spaceport secured, Rourke reported, standing over unconscious Dominion guards. Moving on to planetary defense grid. The coordinated assault left Dominion forces in chaos. Some surrendered immediately. Others fought desperately, but found themselves outmaneuvered at every turn. Above, the space battle ended decisively. The Federation blockade held firm, while broken Dominion ships littered the orbit. In his tower, surrounded by his last loyal guards, Tenzra watched his empire crumble. I will never surrender to primitives, he snarled, even as Federation forces closed in on his position. Humanity had fought not for conquest but for justice. And as Rourke's team stormed the Dominion's palace, the weight of their mission bore down upon them. This was not about revenge. It was about ensuring the Dominion could never again inflict what they had done to Novus Terra. Colonel Rourke moved silently through the gilded halls of the Dominion Palace, her team spread out in a practiced formation. The air felt heavy with tension as they approached Tenzra's inner sanctum. Contact front, someone shouted. Elite Dominion guards emerged from hidden alcoves, their energy weapons lighting up the corridor. Rourke dove behind a marble column as plasma bolts scorched the air. Push forward, she ordered. returning fire with deadly accuracy. The close quarters turned the battle into a brutal dance of advance and retreat. Her troops used their hybrid tech to shut down sections of the palace's power grid, throwing the Dominion forces into darkness. Through the chaos, Rourke's team steadily gained ground. They'd trained for this, fighting in tight spaces against desperate enemies. The Dominion elites fought with fanatic loyalty, refusing to surrender even when surrounded. Finally, they reached the massive doors to Tensra's command center. As they prepared to breach, his voice boomed through the palace speakers. "One step closer and I activate the planetary core destabilizer," Tensra threatened. "Your victory will turn to ash." Rourke tapped her comm. "Commander Chen, are you seeing this?" "Already on it," Liara replied. "Our infiltration programs are in their systems. The destabilizer's safeguards are being locked down. Now." Inside the command center, Tensra howled in fury as his controls went dark. Rourke's team burst through the doors, weapons trained on the Dominion leader. Rourke approached him slowly, her rifle aimed at his head. Her finger tightened on the trigger as memories of Novus Terra's destruction flashed through her mind. "Colonel," Liara's voice came through her earpiece, soft but firm. "We're better than them. The galaxy needs to see that." Rourke's hand shook with rage. 3 billion lives lost on Novus Terra. The choice weighed heavy in her chest. "Exarch Tensra," she finally said, lowering her weapon slightly. "You are under arrest for crimes against humanity and the genocide of Novus Terra." As her troops moved to secure him, Tensra's arrogance finally crumbled. The mighty Dominion, brought low not by extinction, but by humanity's measured strength. Outside, Federation ships broadcast the news across all frequencies. The Dominion capital had fallen. Their reign of terror was over, ended not with wholesale slaughter, but with precise, unstoppable force. The war was over, but its echoes would shape the galaxy forever. As the dust settled and the stars bore witness, the surviving powers gathered to decide what came next. And in that moment, one undeniable truth remained. The galaxy would never again underestimate humanity. In the grand assembly hall of the collective minds, representatives from every major galactic power gathered under the soft glow of artificial starlight. Admiral Osi stood at the podium, his uniform crisp and his voice steady. "The United Human Federation has no desire for conquest," he declared. "Our goal was, and remains, ensuring peace through strength. The former Dominion worlds will be free to govern themselves under the condition they never again threaten galactic stability." Commander Liara sat in the front row, watching the reactions of the alien delegates. Some nodded in approval, while others shifted uncomfortably. The Synthesis Communion representatives huddled together, their neural interfaces flickering rapidly as they processed new data. Silithar approached the podium next, datapad in hand. "My fellow delegates, I present my final analysis of human behavior. We misread them completely. What we saw as naive optimism was a carefully crafted mask. Their cheerful cooperation in joint military exercises, a chance to study our capabilities, their seemingly outdated technology, a smokescreen hiding advances we never imagined." The assembly murmured as Silithar continued. "The day they lost their cool after Novus Terra wasn't a breakdown. It was the moment they stopped pretending." In the back of the hall, War Master Kalthar stood with his honor guard. He caught Admiral Osei's eye and gave a respectful nod. The Raxus Empire had learned a valuable lesson about underestimating humanity. The Synthesis Communion lead delegate rose. "Our most sophisticated models failed to predict human responses. We request closer ties with the Federation to prevent such miscalculations in the future." Later, in a quiet corner of the assembly hall, Colonel Rourke found Commander Liara staring out at the stars. They stood in silence for a moment, both thinking of Novus Terra. 3 billion lives, Liara whispered. "We can't ever let anyone forget what happens when humanity is pushed too far." Rourke nodded. "Or what happens when we choose justice over vengeance." Silithar's final address echoed through the chamber. The galaxy believed humans were playing at being a great power. The truth? They were playing at being harmless. That deception was, and always will be, humanity's greatest weapon. If you enjoyed the story of Jonathan, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.